This is the thing. Oh, Annie, you're going to know all about this now, that legibility and your book cover and how it stands out and everything like that.
Yeah, I leave that to other people.
It's a good thing.
People.
Other people can get quite nerdy about this, as you know.
Did you just say you have people? Annie has people.
I think it was amazing.
Welcome to The Full Stop, a childless community podcast with Sarah Lawrence, Michael Hughes, and me, Berenice Smith. If this is your first time here, welcome, and a warm hello to our loyal listeners. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. The Full Stop tells the story of the childless not by choice community. We hope that us as presenters and our guests can help our childless friends to find a voice and a comfortable place in this world. We also seek to inform those around us who do not identify as childless, so that they can learn and support their friends, colleagues and relatives. This episode welcomes back Dr. Annie Kirby, who first appeared on our podcast way back in 2019. Annie's writing career, which was just starting when we first met, has really taken off, and she's publishing The Hollow Sea in August this year. Here's a review from Rosie Andrews, the Sunday Times best-selling author of The Leviathan. Deftly structured and set against a wild, myth-inspired backdrop, the novel explores grief and violence, freedom and redemption. It's a majestic work of the imagination, with writing that shimmers before the reader, underpinned by a howling, fearless story. I loved it and woke up thinking about it. Now, Sarah and I were thrilled to receive a proof copy, and we're delighted to catch up with Annie in her busy book launching schedule to tell us about her story and the inspiration behind The Hollow Sea, which is an incredible read. We can't wait to share what she's been up to and how she's coming to a bookshop near you very soon.
I want to just say that I'm blaming you for lack of sleep, Annie, because I've literally been, the listeners won't know this, sort of holding up the proof copy of The Hollow Sea. Sarah, you've read it, I've read it. And literally I've been like, the last couple of chapters, I've been saving them up to read because I didn't want it to finish.
Wow.
I absolutely didn't want it to end. I'm like, no, okay, oh God, I'm at chapter 49. I'm going to have to leave. I have to save it up. I didn't want to read it on Monday and Tuesday because there'll be other people around the world listening to this going, yeah, 42 degrees temperature, whoa, that's nothing. But actually it was so hot in our house. And I'm going to sit and I'll start reading a chapter and I would just literally go over into some sort of comatose, heat-driven state. So I've saved the book up in order to finish the last chapters when it was comfortable to sit and read it. And oh my goodness.
I read a book that was set on a mountain when it was really hot, and it really cooled me down. It was really helpful. It's really lovely to hear, because one of the things that I've been most nervous about is the response from other members of the childless not by choice community. So I feel relieved, and I'm just really happy that you enjoyed it.
I did.
Or are enjoying it.
Yes, and I think I was writing something yesterday, I confess, and it was for the episode of the podcast that's gone out before you, which also features another author, Rob Hutchins, and he's written a book about his extreme adventuring. I think that's what I'm going to call it.
Yeah, I've heard about Rob. Yeah,
it's amazing. His life's actually incredible. And I wrote in it that it wasn't a book for adventurers. You didn't have to be kind of a whitewater rafter, rapid swimming nomad. Anyone could read the book because it's got something for everything. In fact, Sarah's piece in the newsletter pulls that apart so beautifully. I think you've written a really good piece in our newsletter. Plug for the newsletter there, everyone. And I think that's true, isn't it, of The Hollow Sea? There is something in that there's so many themes in it, Annie, that it's for everybody, isn't it? It's quite an incredible book. I'm trying to think of a question. I don't know where to start because I'm slightly fangirly, I have to say. You're like, it's amazing, and there is just so much bit. And as I was reading it, I think maybe perhaps because we share a creative writing background,
Yeah.
and that's kind of how we met, but in some way we sort of have that in common, don't we? Although you are so much better at that and went on to great things with that, and mine is a very small sort of thing in that area, but that working out of all of those themes and where they all interlink, that's some mean feat. How do you start with that?
That is a really good question, and a really hard question to answer.
Sorry.
No, but it's a really good question, and it's the kind of thing I like to hear from other authors, so I'm going to have a go. I think what I really wanted to do was to tell a story about childlessness, and it's only one tiny experience of childlessness, because there's so many different experiences of childlessness, and it's not even my experience, it's fiction. The characters in the book have a different experience than I have had, so I wanted, I guess, childless people, or childless not by choice people, to feel seen by the book, and to feel that it was in some way an authentic representation of that tiny little part of what somebody's journey was. But I also wanted other people to maybe understand a little bit more about how it might feel to want children and not be able to have them, and not get a miracle baby at the end of your story, and those kinds of things. I wanted that, but I also wanted to just write a good story that would appeal to not everybody, because it's subjective, but to anyone who's interested in any number of things. So there's kind of like folklore, it's things that I like. Actually, I put things that I like in a book. So I like storm-lashed islands, and I like folklore, and I like sea myths, and I like boats, and I like kind of the idea of remote archipelago in the middle of nowhere. So I took all of that and smushed it up together. And then as a writer, I used to be a pantser, so I would kind of just sit down and write, and I wrote a couple of novels that way that were not very good and didn't really work. So for this book, I plotted it within an inch of its life. I wrote a really detailed outline, and then I wrote scene by scene treatment, and I literally, then all I had to do, it was so plotted, all I had to do then was to just go and fill in the gaps with some nice words, and it's weird for me. And I'm writing another book now which I'm not doing that way, but for this book it kind of worked to do it that way, because there are a lot of threads, I suppose, and not all of them tied up, but I wanted to kind of weave all the threads together in a meaningful way, but with some space for people to interpret the book in their own way as well. So yeah, I just became this mad plotter with pages and pages. I use Scrivener, actually. So Scrivener is like a fantastic tool. They're not paying me or anything to say this, but it's just an amazing tool for moving scenes around, and you can just drag different chapters around and different scenes around, and it's not really a spoiler to say that one of the threads in the book runs backwards, so I plotted it forwards and backwards and moved it around and did lots of stuff like that. So and then my editor lovely Cleo Cornish, my editor at Penguin, Michael Joseph, we went through 3 or 4 structural edits as well with her guidance, and lifted it from where it was to about 1 million miles higher. So I think if you read the very first draft, you'd see a lot of similarities to the final published draft, but also lots of changes as well. So and I kind of enjoy that. As a reader, I enjoy putting the pieces of a book together, and as a writer, I found, I'm saying this with the benefit of it's done now. I don't have to do it anymore. But as a writer, in a perverse kind of way, like running a marathon, I enjoyed the piecing together side of it.
I'm curious, Annie, which thread came first then? Because you said it kind of smooshed everything that you loved. Which one came first?
I wrote one of the books that I wrote as when I used to be, didn't plan, was kind of a mystery set on a remote island with folklore. And so I suppose that came first because I went back to that when I decided I wanted to write another book. So it's a different book. What's really interesting is I picked that book up and read it through before I started writing this one. And it's a different story and different characters. But what's really interesting, I wrote it when I still thought I would be a mum. And at the end, my character is pregnant. So it was really interesting to me to see that I'd kind of followed that trope almost of the character becoming pregnant at the end, and it was just such a common thing, whether it's a miracle pregnancy or not. It's so common for that to happen. It was really fascinating for me to read through that book and see all the things that I found frustrating as a childless not by choice person, trying to find stories and literature that represent my experience. So that was really fascinating for me. So I suppose what came first was I wanted to go back to the island that I'd created, but I wanted to tell a different story this time. And what I wanted to do was tell a story of somebody who wanted children, couldn't have them, and didn't have them at the end of the book. So that's the bit that came first, I suppose. Those two elements came first from different places, and then everything else, I don't know where the ideas come from. They just do, and it wove it all together.
Oh wow! I've got to be honest. My whole thing is mythology. I'm completely into like the stories about the Selkies, all the Celtic sort of stories. And so when I read the book, I was just like flipping out. It's in Scotland. It's it's set on like the wilds of Scotland, and it's like got all the mythology. And I was like tick 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 tick. And then obviously it had the childlessness in it. I was curious though. I know you sort of said it's not your story, but it kind of felt to me, and obviously I don't know you personally, but it felt like there were aspects of the main character that were you. Did I get that right, or is it just completely not you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think she's very similar to me in personality. She's quite introspective. I'm quite introspective. So her story is different to mine in some ways, similar in others, but certainly I drew on my own kind of personal feelings about childlessness and that holding on to hope for so long, and then suddenly realizing that there is no hope, and then that kind of that transition from potential motherhood to not, and then that kind of that huge space in your future that you have to fill. So I definitely drew on all of that. And I think in terms of, I assume you're referring to Scotty, the character of Scotty. I think she is quite like me. She's quite impulsive. She's also a bit of a runner awayer, which might be a feature of my personality. She's quite introspective. She can be a bit grumpy. She feels things quite deeply. So I think all of those, because she is quite a flawed character, but we're all flawed. And so I didn't want her to be perfect. She's not always as nice to her mum as she should be. I am always nice to my mum, but also I think that the other character, Thordis, I think she kind of represents a side of me as well. Or maybe what I would like, because I think she's amazing. I think Thordis is just an amazing person, and so kind of brave and also not perfect. But I guess there's kind of qualities I would like to have, because I'm not quite brave enough. I'm a bit timid. That I would, those sides of me that I would like to have, I put those into Thordis as well. So I think I can maybe I can see bits of myself in both characters, but definitely more like Scotty than anyone else, and I definitely drew on my own emotions as well when I was writing her.
There's some conversations in the book, isn't there, that I think are quite scenes that I think that despite Scotty's journey, which I share, but actually I think you've portrayed it to the point that I absolutely believed in all of that.
Thank you so much.
It was like, okay, yeah, I know this bit, and that trying not to say things without spoiling is so hard, isn't it? I have to say, and that bit when she did so, but there are several moments where I think there is that obviously I think that when we get my words straight, because I'm doing a really, really piss poor job of that right now. For a podcast, it's a bit rubbish. Anyway, what am I thinking? So there are moments in the book where I can identify with those feelings she has, the running awayness. And it brought up quite a lot of conversations in our house, actually, when I finished the book. And my husband's desperate to read this, so it's going to be disappearing, and he's going to start reading it now. And I'll be interested to what he thinks, because the running away and the grief, the process, of course, of letting go of something to the point where she goes through this story of okay, running away, to this is not what I'm doing, and some of those pertinent conversations that she has with Jasminda, important conversations that can take a lot of us years, obviously for the sake of the book. I wish it was longer, but actually that you have to put them into the book. And I think that was an incredibly important part of the book, that it's all the conversations and the dialogue, and they just happen just to be in there a little, not overdone, but they're just there enough for you to remind yourself. I think that's kind of what I'm getting to, is that we know that she can't have children, but it's not the overriding thing, because there's so many other things going on. It's a mere part of the narrative that you drop in sometimes in how you plotted it out, to just say, and just remember this also affects her too. And I think that was just really beautifully done, because it then didn't feel overwhelming, and it didn't feel like a lecture, and it didn't feel triggering to me. I want to kind of say that, I think, to the audience as well. But some of it was difficult, I have to say. There were some bits that came up and I thought, oh, but you load it with some empathy. There's the conversation on the boat is the one that I identified with the most, where she's sitting on the boat with Alison. And they're trying to involve, Alison is trying to get them all to chat together because they don't know each other. And I don't think it's a spoiler for me to say that they sit there on the boat, and she says, "What about you, Tony?" Alison tried to draw our taciturn skipper into the conversation. Any kids? Tony's face broke into a crumpled smile. 4, he said, and 7 grand thing I've ever done. And there's Scotty sitting there, and that just broke my heart when I read it, because I thought, cracking, yes, I've had that one so many times, and often we can have it every flipping day of the week if we were, in certain situations. Absolutely. And it happens up, and I think that was just so beautifully executed.
And obviously Scotty is sitting there because she knows that she's going to get the question next.
Yeah.
What was really fascinating to me, actually, is I read another book recently by Emily Pine, Ruth and Penn, and one of the characters in that book has been having unsuccessful IVF for many years. It's kind of broken her marriage, and without giving too much away about someone else's book, that conversation, someone asking them if they have children, happens in that book too. And I was like, when I read it, and it's almost it's not word for word, but it's quite similar to the scene in my book. And I was like, this is awful. People are going to think that I've plagiarized. I mean, anyone who knows anything about the book world will know that that's not true, because Ruth and Penn has only just come out. But then I kind of reflected on that, and I realized the reason that Emily Pine and I have written such a similar scene is because this is what gets said to us so often and to so many of us, and we have to deal with those conversations. Actually now I think it's a really good thing that there are 2 books out with a scene in with that conversation, because maybe people will now check themselves before they ask that question, or check themselves before they respond to the answer to that question with something really insensitive. it was really amazing to me to see kind of that mirror of what I'd written in someone else's work, but also again, that was quite personal to me because of having been asked that question and never knowing how to answer. However you answer it, it's always awkward, isn't it? If someone asks you if you have children and you say no, there's never that either they don't know what to say, or they say something insensitive, or they walk away, or and I think, I mean, I don't mind saying that in that case, Scotty just says no, and she said that the word no breaks into pieces on her tongue, and the other person doesn't even notice, completely oblivious, just starts banging on about how much time you still have, you know. I think, interestingly, I had quite a lot more of those kinds of conversations in the first draft of the book. There's lots more insensitivity in draft 1 than there is in a final draft, just because for storytelling reasons I couldn't have all of them in because it slowed the plot down a bit, so I had to sacrifice some of them. And I think back about them now, sometimes I think, oh, I really wish I could have had this conversation about grandchildren, or this conversation about children, but you do have to make sacrifices for the pace and that kind of thing, and I hope that I kept the right ones in, and I think in a lot of places, even though Scotty's story is different to mine, I think as a community of childless not by choice people, I think what binds us together in all of our difference is the things that people say to us. And that the feeling of exclusion, and how, and it's not just once, but again and again and again and again, that we have to deal with these situations.
I was really struck with Thordis. She was kind of, when you think about archetypes of childless women, and there's Thordis with all of this mystery around her. I won't, no plot, I'm not going to give any plots away, but for me, I love Scotty. I love that she was flawed and that she was, made mistakes. And I was like, yeah, tick, that's me. But Thordis, I was really drawn to. She had a bit of a mystique about her, a bit of a mystery. And there was kind of that archetype of, I don't know, witch.
Yeah. I loved her. I thought she was incredibly powerful. And actually, although it sounds, maybe I don't know about you, Sarah, but I actually wanted to kind of be a bit like her. I thought she was incredible. So,
she was kick-ass, wasn't she, basically?
Yeah, she was so powerful. And the way that she did her anger and everything that was going on with her and with Marion, but the way that she presented herself, whether it's the myth behind it, but there's something incredibly legendary about her that I think, would you have felt the same way, Sarah, if you had read the book, say 10 years ago, for example? Say you'd read The Hollow Sea 10 years ago and read about Thordis. Would you have felt the same now or then as you do now about her? Was something that was bugging me as well, because I think I probably wouldn't. I would have thought, oh no, I feel a bit sorry for her. No, I'd like to be somebody else. But actually now I think maybe where I am, I find her incredibly inspirational. And as much as I love Scotty, I think Scotty is so human, so approachable, and so very us now. There's something legendary, but in such a powerful way about Thordis.
I don't think I would have been drawn to her. I think 10 years ago, where was I 10 years ago? I was still trying. And I think she would have been a bit of an elephant in the room for me, actually.
Yeah, me too, yeah.
So,
But now I think she's absolutely rocking it. It's just amazing. You sort of have character, don't you? You can either relate to one or the other, or a bit of both. I thought she was amazing. She's a legendary character.
One of the things I really wanted to do with the character of Thordis was I wanted to kind of head-on approach this idea of childless women being assumed to be witches or child stealers, both in her case. But I also wanted her, unfairly, she's unfairly maligned. But what I also wanted to do, and again, without giving too many plot details away, she does something spectacularly unselfish to help her worst enemy. And And that was really important for me as well, that she did this incredibly unselfish thing on more than one occasion, actually. And again, she's quite a flawed character. She's quite prickly. She's really feisty and amazing, and I love all those things about her, but she's also quite flawed. And I think selfish on some levels, kind of selfish and vain maybe, but also she made these incredible sacrifices for the person who'd taken everything from her, really. And that was really important to me as well, to have a childless character do something so unselfish. She's the most unselfish acts in the book are done by this person who's lost so much. And that was really what I wanted to do with that character.
Yeah, I think that there's just so many things that she does, and she puts something first that you think, you kind of okay, stop, no, don't do that. Obviously for the plot line that would not have been a good thing, but to create something. And I know I went through that as well with oh god, it was way back in my master's degree, and I went and had a look at the history of childless women in different situations. Witches comes up a lot. Yeah, obviously no doubt that several hundred years ago I'd be quite crispy now, or dunked. I don't know. It's quite alarming that actually is something that's fairly actually recent history as well, and that judgment does stay, doesn't it? I think in mythology, I think some of the dodgy stuff in some of our storytelling from the past as well. I remember reading something about women in medieval times. They didn't have children, they had to go into church and they had to have bricks tied on their feet, and it got quite triggering to read some of it. It really did. And all the witch finding too. You created something much stronger from the story, I think, that from a historical narrative that's very painful to read, isn't it? As well. Michael, do you get that same sort of mythology there? I mean, we talk about kind of this whole idea of kind of childless people being judged, but in Australia, do you have that? I mean, a lot of this is caught up, I think, a bit in English folklore. Actually British folklore, I think. But does that happen there so much?
I think being such a, let's say, a country that is fairly new in the European sense, not really, but I'm sure some of the different cultural groups would have brought their those beliefs that get that stay through generations, like the witch, but not really. And then the Aboriginal culture is just something totally different, absolutely totally different. But Annie, I wanted to say to you that we've got a little, our full stop podcast chat. So when the girls got hold of your book, it's like, oh my God, oh wow, oh wow, oh wow, oh wow. So I wanted to let you know that these two girls are total fangirls right now.
Oh,
so now I'm really looking forward to the audiobook, because I know it's coming out in audiobook, because I've seen your posts, because you were really, concerned about, okay, who's going to read it? So because I travel a lot, that's what I like to do. So I'm really looking forward to it. And this conversation has given me some really big, FOMO. That's the right one. Fear of missing out. Yep. Nearly got the other one. So I'm really looking forward to listening to your book. But what I'm really interested in too is, so my father has written a number of books, and what always intrigues me is how you structure your life to write your book. The mechanics of it. So, is it a ritual that you get up at a certain time of day and then spend time doing that, or is it only when the mood catches you that you then write something down? So take us through a typical writing day.
First of all, Fran Burgoyne, the actor who reads the audiobook, is incredible. So you're in for a real treat. She's amazing. I am a bit of a waster when it comes to when it comes to writing. I am not very structured. I'm not one of the people that gets up at 5 a.m. and writes for 2 hours or writes between 9 and 1. This is really terrible advice, probably. I just write when I feel like it. Is that awful? If I write when I've got something to say, I know that all the advice is always you should write, regardless, but I write when the mood takes me, or to be fair, if I've got a deadline. But I'm sorry to say that for me, writing, I want writing to be fun, and not so much to be a job. I don't know, this is all very unprofessional sounding. Yeah, honestly, I write when I feel like I want to write and when I've got something to say. And that is very, very, very bad advice. Don't follow my advice, listeners.
I think that's perfect advice, because it's human advice, because you have done creative writers studies, your master's in creative writing. I've got a degree in it, and honestly, the advice that you get, isn't it, on the courses, morning the pages. I'm just like, I can barely do morning dressing, never mind writing. You're insane. It is. I think it's true. If you're in the right place. And I also would have thought with the Hollow Sea, you've got to write when you want to write, because there is so much emotion in it as well. That must have been quite draining at times for you.
Yeah, it was quite draining, and I think you're right about that. I mean, I've never been a journal keeper. I've never done morning pages. I don't even have a writer's notebook, which is probably, I will get kicked out of all of the writing clubs for admitting that. But what I do is think a lot about my stories and my characters. So the time, and maybe this is the real answer to Michael's question, the time that I spent at my computer, I don't write anything by hand either, sorry. The time I spend at my computer typing away is a tenth or less of the time that I spend thinking about my books and my characters. So I suppose when I say that I am kind of very lax, maybe I'm not, because I'm always thinking, and I might think about a story or a character for a couple of years before I put pen to paper, or fingers to keyboard. So maybe that's my process, is the thinking. And I guess to answer your question, Berenice, about how it could be draining, definitely in this book, in particular in those areas where the characters' experiences mirrored my experiences, so where things got quite personal, they were quite draining and quite difficult to write, but also quite therapeutic to write as well. I kind of, for me, the whole process of writing this book has been a really healing. I've got a lot of stuff out and onto the page, which has been so helpful. And to be honest, once I sold the book, it all got a bit more structured because I had deadlines for new drafts and things like that. So I kind of enjoyed that side of it as well, and I think if I've got like edits to do or something like that, I'm much more structured in my process, and I will sit down and do a couple of hours of editing. But it's that initial kind of first draft creativity. I'm afraid I do go against all of the advice, and I wait for inspiration.
It sounds like method acting. It sounds like you're utterly immersed in it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what it feels like, Sarah. That's a weird way of doing it.
Wow. So it must cost you a lot then to actually be that emotionally connected to the story.
Yeah, I suppose it does. And definitely I did have to pace myself a little bit while I was writing it, or go off and do other things. But interested, because I'm writing something else now which is not quite so personal, but I'm still trying to immerse myself in that way. I think that's how my creativity works for me is to try and immerse myself in that way. Not everything obviously is going to be as personal to me as the Hollow Sea, but yeah, I kind of think I found my way now from writing that book. Has helped me a lot in knowing who I am as a writer and how I work as a writer, which I didn't really know before, which is amazing because I've been writing for years and I've done an MA in 2003, 2004. You would have thought, and I've published short stories, you would have thought that I would have known who I was as a writer, but I didn't until this book, if that makes sense.
Oh, wow. So it's your real, I don't know, homecoming or discovery?
Breakthrough origin story, something like that, yeah.
Yeah, like Marvel.
I would imagine the process as well of writing for a publisher is very different to writing as a self-publisher. Having worked with authors in both, and I've done that quite often and still do over the years, there's a very different way of doing it. Self-publishing is one thing, but writing for a publishing house and an imprint is another experience. How did you find that was different for you as well, and how did that go?
Well, I was actually on a mentoring scheme with Penguin. So I was being mentored by an editor at Penguin, Michael Joseph, which is the imprint of Penguin, who are publishing my book. So I don't know if I can answer that question, because I kind of had an editor or a mentor through the whole process. So it wasn't as if I wrote the book on my own and then sold it and then my editor stepped in.
True.
So I had two mentors through the process, and the second mentor, Cleo, is who became my editor once the book was sold. So I suppose I can only compare it to when I wrote before, when I was writing other books that are in the bottom drawer and will stay there. And what I will say is I loved having someone to bounce ideas off of. It doesn't have to. I was lucky that I had an editor, but it doesn't have to be. It can be a writing friend or a writing group or beta readers, things like that. But I did find it so useful, especially in terms of the structure of the book, because the structure is quite complicated. I found it quite useful to have someone tell me if it made sense. For example, some of the backwards runs in some of the narrative runs backwards, and so those kinds of things are quite useful to have someone say quite early on what I needed to do to make that work. But the book I'm working on now is a bit more of a solitary endeavour. Not quite ready to share, but also quite an unusual book in terms of its structure. So I'm kind of, I suppose, relying on myself a little bit more for the current book, and that's kind of fun too. But then there's also, I'm building up to the stage where I share it with my agent. It's quite nerve-wracking, because what if they don't like it? So I suppose what was lovely for me in having a mentor is I had that guidance, and I knew that I was going on roughly the right path. I still needed to go through 3 or 4 structural edits after I sold it, and that's the thing about writing, especially writing novels, is you're expected to go off and do 2 years of work, and not knowing whether anybody is going to want it, whether your agent will like it, or if your agent likes it, whether they'll be able to sell it. So I don't think I realized that before. I think I don't know. I don't think I realized how different also it would be working on a second book, because now I'm thinking, what does my editor like? What does my agent like? As opposed to, I'm just going to write what I want to write. But to be honest, though, I think writing what you want to write is probably the best process, not trying to second guess what other people will like and will want. For me, anyway. so that's kind of the approach I'm taking. But yeah, I didn't have that same experience that most first-time novelists have of being kind of out there on their own and then suddenly selling the book and having an agent and an editor.
And that's very rare as well.
It's quite rare, yes.
It's as rare as hen's teeth. I think there's a whole myth, isn't there, of kind of going around and being able to get the agent and the deal. Actually, that's kind of where I think a lot of people turn to self-publishing, but that in itself is also fraught with complications as well, and an awful lot of expense. It's not easy by any stretch.
It's not, no.
Yeah, I think probably 90% of the people that I have, the authors I have that I self-publish for, tend to come to me because they've got issues with somebody else or something else, or it's just gone wrong somewhere and you just need that steer. And each time I talk to somebody and we pick up a project, and there's always something else I'm learning about. Oh, that bit could also go wrong. You know, I kind of know what most common pitfalls are, but if I was to write a book, it would probably be about the common pitfalls of publishing, if I could actually get the words out. That, because there's just, but then again, I wouldn't cover them all. There's so many of them. I think in-house publishing, or with an agent or with a publisher, but also self-publishing too. It's a very, very, very fraught business and very misunderstood.
Self-publishing, I think self-publishing is like come on in leaps and bounds. It's a really solid business model, but it's also a lot of work.
Yeah,
a lot of work and a lot of expense, as you said. I guess I'm kind of quite grateful to be, as I'm traditionally published, that I have, you know, having an agent to support me when I'm feeling a bit wobbly, and having that relationship with an editor has been really, really invaluable to me. So I mean, for anyone who kind of goes it alone for self-publishing, I'm completely in awe, because I know how much has been done for me by other people in the traditional publishing model.
Yeah.
And
I think it doesn't take much when you
outside of that. That's amazing.
Yeah, I think with self-publishing as well, it doesn't take much. I think when something goes slightly wrong, certainly common things are kind of the cover design. Obviously, it's an area that I'm quite passionate about. But yeah, cover design, cover feedback, and it can be absolutely devastating if what someone gets, if they share it, I don't know, on Facebook. Here's the cover, what do you think? And everyone goes, oh no, or it's differing opinions, that sort of thing. It's not the same as a cover reveal. Cover feedback is very different, and you've got to have a really thick skin, and that's just one area alone. And that might not be something that even the authors themselves as creators, their authors do like to have a bash at that. It's a particular specialism as well, book cover design. It's complicated and fraught with myths. Yeah. Not quite so complicated and old as the Hollow Sea, but nevertheless there are quite a lot of myths within publishing as well. I think one of them is that it's easy. So I think absolutely incredible that you have been through the story you've been through and the journey you've been through. What was it like finding out that you were going to be mentored? I mean, if you can go back to that time, what was that feeling like?
So I entered something called WriteNow, Penguin WriteNow, which is a mentoring scheme for groups who are traditionally underrepresented in publishing. So I have a chronic illness, and I don't know whether that counts as being underrepresented. So, but I kind of entered, and I said my piece about my chronic illness, and I entered the first chapter of my book. In fact, I wrote the first chapter of The Hollow Sea specifically for entering it in Penguin WriteNow. And then they had, I think a couple of thousand entries, and they whittled it down to 150 people to go to publishing workshops. And I got in, and that was amazing. And part of that workshop was to get some face-to-face feedback from a Penguin editor. And I got that feedback, and it was amazing. And then they said, you've been shortlisted, can we have the rest of your book? And I was like, I don't have the rest of a book. So I kind of bashed out 20,000 words in pretty quickly and submitted that. And then I got shortlisted, and I had a phone interview, and then I got on the scheme, and they picked 10 of us to be on the scheme, and I think they picked my book because it wasn't perfect, actually, and I guess that's because it was mentoring. They could see potential there, but I needed some support and some help. I couldn't believe it, really. It was incredible to be. Well, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe I got to the workshops. I couldn't believe that I got longlisted. Couldn't believe that I got shortlisted. Couldn't believe that I got on a scheme. It was all very surreal. And then I was matched with my lovely mentor, originally Jessica, and then I changed kind of halfway through the scheme to be working with Cleo. And I finally finished my book and sent Cleo the final draft, and I was coming up towards the end of my time on the scheme, and she phoned me up to say that she wanted to buy the book, so I needed to have an agent for the negotiations, which is just ridiculous. It's a kind of thing that happens to other people. So Cleo introduced me to some agents. I signed with my wonderful agent Sue Armstrong, and she went off and supported me in the negotiations, and within the space of 2 weeks from Cleo calling me to say she wanted to buy the book, I had signed with an agent, and I had signed with Penguin Michael Joseph, and it was all a bit of a blur and all quite surreal, and the kind of thing that happens to other people, not to me. So it was amazing, really, and also a real privilege for me that I already had worked with Cleo, and so I knew that I wanted Cleo to continue working with me on the book, and so that was a massive privilege to be able to do as well.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
It's amazing.
incredible.
What comes over actually in all of that, apart from just sitting there going, oh my gosh, I'm just like happy tears for you, because it's just so lovely to hear that story, is that you talk quite a lot about Cleo, clearly a safe pair of hands for you, and there's a huge amount of trust in that too. And
Yeah.
I think that also for me is reflected in the story, perhaps because I know you, because I've known you longer than I've known Sarah and Michael, actually, I think, probably. But also that I felt that the book was safe. I know you are a safe pair of hands, and whether that's perhaps maybe that relationship with Cleo, which clearly is quite important to you as well.
Yeah, it's incredibly important to me, and I mean, I can't really describe how much she's lifted the book with every edit, and she always tells me the nice stuff first, which is great. She tells me what she loved first, and then very kindly tells me all of the things that I need to fix, and then I fix them or ignore them, thinking I don't want to fix that, and then she'll send another really kind note, also mentioning the stuff that I didn't fix the first time, but always really kindly and always really supportive. And she's always right. She's never wrong about any of it. It's natural, I think, to sometimes feel like a little bit resistant when you're asked to make changes. She's never been wrong about any change. She has known exactly what I should do. And it was similar, actually, when I first started on the scheme. I was working with another editor called Jessica Leake, and I had the most incredible conversations with her about the structure and what would it mean to tell this thread backwards, and what do you want the readers to feel when they learn something, and would they feel differently if they learned it later. So I was kind of very blessed to have Jessica at the very, very beginning of the process, and then very blessed to have Cleo support me through getting the first draft done, and then the actual editing has been an incredible process. I mean, editing is painful, especially structural edits, when you're having to cut chapters in half and move things around, and because it's quite a complicated structure of a book, that was quite painful at times. If for example, Cleo's advice was to cut some of the chapters in half and make them shorter, that was quite easy to do with Scotty's chapters, and almost impossible to do with Thordis's chapters, just because of the reverse thing and how they were structured. But it is, I mean, yeah, I am so grateful to have had Cleo to help me on that journey. And I know, you know, it wouldn't be the same book if I hadn't had that support.
That relationship with editors and authors can sometimes be quite tricksy, can't it, as well? I think so. It's good that to hear a positive story. I think there's more positive stories to be told out there between that. It's an important one. But as you say, it's kind of the way the information is delivered, and that relationship is so critical as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, obviously I had that privilege of already having worked with Cleo when deciding whether to accept the offer. But if you haven't had that, I think it's really important, both for agents and editors, to know what their vision is for your book and whether it matches yours, and whether the things that they think you need to work on are the same things that you need to work on. Because it's really, I think having the wrong agent or the wrong editor is worse than having no agent or no editor. So I've been extremely blessed as well with Sue, my agent as well, completely understands the book. So I was very, very lucky. But absolutely, I have heard, you know, really painful stories from other writers who signed in haste, I suppose, because they had an offer, but without really understanding that the agent's vision for their book or the editor's vision for their book was maybe not quite the same as theirs. So yeah, I've been very blessed.
I think that's true. It's kind of one of those things where I again, going back to my business and the books design that I do, often it can be signed in haste. And I think that if anyone's listening to this and thinking, oh, I've got this book, I want to do it, proceed with care and caution and listen. I'd say listen to your gut instinct. If you feel like that person isn't quite the right person for you, there are others. You don't have to go with the first person you meet, whether that's an editor, whether it's agents, whether it's you're working in self-publishing and it's your first designer that you've met or anything like that. You know, it's very much a collaboration. I use that word all the time. I must be the word I use probably the most after my dog's name, collaboration. But I think it very much is that. I think with any kind of book, it's important to have a feeling together about it. And I kind of think it's a bit like sort of dating, I suppose. Are they my person? I think, you know, just an inkling. Is there potential here? And if anyone goes away with any doubts and thinks they don't understand it, or if they get a contract through and the contract just doesn't make sense and it's not plain English or whatever your language is, and you don't understand it, then get the help you need. And if that feedback can come back and it doesn't work for you, then I think that's when my red flags would be kind of waving quite heavily at that point, breezing away and thinking, okay, it's not quite right. And I'll put some show notes. I'll put down a couple of things about some links maybe that I've got as well, because that could be quite useful. So the Alliance of Independent Authors is incredible. I'm a partner member and they endorse all of us partner members. It's quite nerve-wracking. They go through all of our business and then you get endorsed and you're allowed to work with their self-publishing authors. But again, they have an awful lot of common sense as well, and there'll be other routes as well, I think, with traditional publishing and finding an agent as well. And we'll put down the details of WriteNow too as well. But it's so important to have that collaboration and that support, because it can make the journey so much harder.
I think it's worth mentioning also, because my route to getting an agent was a little bit different from most people's. It's not that helpful because most people wouldn't be in that very privileged situation I have of being introduced to agents by my editor. I just wanted to say that some of the agents that my editor introduced me to rejected me, even though they knew that my editor wanted to buy the book, and even though they liked my book, they still rejected me because they knew that they were not the right person to take my book forward. And I think that's quite an important thing to know, that when you're querying your book and subbing it around to agents, is that a rejection is not necessarily, it's not a rejection of you or your book. They're in many cases saying that they are not the right person. They're rejecting themselves on your behalf for your book because they're not the right person to take it forward.
Yeah, agree. Yeah, I've rejected projects at this end too. I could do them. I've got the capacity to do it, but they're not the right fit. I know I'm not the right person. You know, I'll give them somebody else, but if it's not the right fit for me and for them, you kind of know that. You get a gut instinct about it too. I think that's it. Rejection doesn't mean you're rubbish. It just means sometimes, often, it's actually the fit isn't right.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that's a
And
good thing.
it still stings, but it's
Yeah.
a good
It's
thing.
horrible to do. Yeah. Yeah.
So Annie, I'd like to take you back to those mechanics again. The reason why is because I can remember my dad smashing away on a manual typewriter in the evening after work, in the dining room, which was right next to the lounge room while we were all trying to watch TV, in a small British house in Southminster, Essex, swearing when he made a mistake. And I think about the way that he put his book together. I know another author that I follow, Daniel Silver. He's an American journalist, and his wife lets out little snippets about his process. He actually writes longhand on the floor of his study to start, to get the creative process down. So I'm interested to know where do you write? Do you have things around to inspire you, or is that just a myth? Is that just, just that sort of romanticized view of writing a book? Or do you have a window that you look at through? Try and describe it for me.
So I usually write in the room that I'm in now, which is quite interesting for me, because this would have been the room that would have been the children's nursery. And ended up being the room that I wrote my book about, never having children, and having, the nursery always being empty. So that's quite interesting for me to kind of sit in. And I live in a terrace house, so just next door is my neighbour's nursery with the baby in. So it's quite interesting writing the book, and I could sometimes hear the baby crying through the wall. I know that's not really the question that you're asking, but
no, but it paints the picture.
But mostly I write in here. I have another desk because I work from home as a university researcher. So I have a desk downstairs where I do my university work. It's a completely different space. It has a different feel to it. So definitely this is kind of my preferred space for writing fiction. I don't know why. It's just a nice little small room that I can lock myself away in. But also, if I'm in the zone, I think I can be anywhere, because I sometimes, hire a cheap, lastminutecottage.com. I might go and hire a cheap chalet somewhere and sit and work for myself. So if I'm in the zone, it's just me and the screen, and what's around me doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter whether I'm on my desktop now, but I could be on my MacBook, or doesn't matter. So I guess, this little room means quite a lot to me, and it's where I like to be to create. But I don't need it as such. It's more of a preference. So for example, and I mentioned earlier that I sort of needed to write 20,000 words of my novel pretty quickly. By chance, I was away a place called Circle of Mise in France, and I was teaching writing there, and I just stayed on for a few days, and kind of I sat in a beautiful room there, being wined and dined and waited on, and just focusing. So I suppose I'm saying I can get this hyper focus if I'm really in the story and really in that place, and then it doesn't matter. But on a more normal day, this is the room that I would come to get started, to be in that space.
I'm always fascinated by that sort of things. Sorry, who was speaking?
Sorry, it was just something that occurred to me, is that I don't think I've got them here, but Agatha Christie's notebooks. There's a book called it's The Secret Notebooks of Agatha Christie by John Curran, I think. Is his name, and it's fascinating because it's Agatha Christie's notebooks all about the plot lines for Miss Marple, for Poirot, for everything, and they are all completely unsequenced. Loads of them, just paperback things, all sorts of different types of books as well, bound little books, and they've got the shopping list in, they've got phone messages, there's random thoughts about something completely nothing to do with anything she's writing, and then just in the corner there might be a little bit about a particular important plot line from the affair at Styles or something like that. There'll be something that's critical. And this guy John Curran, he was given all of the stuff by the estate, these Agatha Christie's family, and said, could you help us sort them out? And I think he's a writer, but he's also kind of a researcher as well. And it took him absolutely months, sat at Greenways, which you think, oh, beautiful. And I had this vision of her sitting at the desk and looking out across the lawn and coming up with some kind of amazing kind of twist, you know. And actually, it's all just in these piles of these random books, and they're an absolute mess. And it was just so gratifying to read that, actually, because I thought, yeah, you know, most people kind of work. There's no order to it whatsoever. But occasionally you just find this gem where she's obviously thought, that's how he does it. You know,
amazing. It's amazing. It's really incredible as a writer when you get those moments as well, when you suddenly, when you've had a plot problem or a plot hole, and then suddenly it all falls into place. Those are the best moments, definitely.
You had a few of those, yeah?
Yeah, I've had a few of those, yeah.
Was there any particular part of the Hollow-Sea that you really just sort of wanted to sort of give up and just say, I can't do this? Was there any part of that journey?
I think I guess the really tricky part for me was the mechanics of Scotty uncovering the past, and that side of things doesn't come naturally to me. You know, if they can all just sit around by the lake drinking tea, I'm fine with that, but the actual plot sequence of Scotty uncovering the past was that was the absolutely hardest bit, in terms of not in terms of the emotional sense, but in terms of the mechanics of the book. That was really difficult for me. And even, you know, right into the third or fourth structural edit, my lovely Cleo was saying, you know, why wouldn't she just do this, or why wouldn't she just say this? And I'd be like, because then there'd be no book. So it's almost that process of forcing your character to go down a certain route in a way that's believable and that allows you to tell the story in the order that you want to tell it, and in a way that's also satisfying for the reader, and they're not going, well, why on earth did they do that? It's completely out of character. So that for me, it was the most headachy part. It wasn't so bad with Thordis, because I felt like in Thordis's story there were a lot more gaps deliberately, that I left empty spaces on purpose. But I felt like Scotty's narrative needed to be a bit more, to have fewer of those gaps, and to be a bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't think I know the word I'm looking for, but just to not, I guess, just to have the mystery unfold in a satisfying way. And I read crime thrillers, but I don't write them. But I was almost thinking about, is there going to be a twist? And I think I decided I didn't really want to have a twist. So how do I then make that satisfying if there's not going to be a big twist at the end, and there's still going to be some unanswered questions? So that for me was the bit that, you know, and every time, you know, someone points out a plot hole, it's like, oh.
Modern technology means it makes it quite hard, isn't it? Because you say, if you sort of went down the modern tech route, there wouldn't be a story. But actually, when you paired it with the emotions and everything else going through the story, the childlessness supports the feelings that mean that she doesn't do the whole modern tech thing and the solutions that we might obviously think that would be the way to do it. The plot twist for me actually was the other male character in it, the character of Kenva, yeah. I thought that was a bit of a plot twist. Some of the stuff that went on, like, oh, didn't know that was going to happen. Anyway, that was what I thought was just like, I was like, oh my gosh, I was surprised, and I thought that was really interesting. I thought that was really cool. Anyway, everyone's going to want to go off and find out about Kenva now. Kenva's quite critical, isn't he, to all of this?
He is.
Yeah.
He's an interesting character, and I think people will maybe. I think his involvement might be one of those areas that people pick up on things at different paces. So it'll be maybe a slightly different reading experience for everybody, depending on when you have that moment.
Yeah, I think that's true. Without spoiling it for everybody, there are certain things you think, oh yeah, there are several critical moments, I think, in his encounter as well, and also his setup, his life setup as well, is also an interesting thing too. There's quite an interesting narrative, isn't there, I think, with men and women in the book as well, and that power as well. There's the power shift that happens all the way through the book between men and women. It comes up an awful lot. Was that something that you deliberately set out to do, or is that just the characters themselves kind of sharing their stories with you?
I think maybe a combination of the two things. I think I certainly I was thinking a lot about the myths and the way in which myths are often not very kind to women or to the female characters in the myths. And they're not very kind to childless women, but they're actually not very kind to mothers or to stepmothers or to whatever, if you don't conform with whatever society thinks you should be as a woman, then the myths are there to tell you, that you're not matching up to where you should be. And I think Scotty mentions that at some point in the book, that the myths of the archipelago are not terribly progressive, and I think they're quite reflective of that it's not a place that's especially kind to women. But I also think, again, not to give too much plot away, but Scotty goes to visit Kenva at his house and discovers that she had made some misassumptions about him. That's an assumption I've made about people before, and then been like, I can't believe that I didn't realize that. So I wanted to include that, actually, because I don't know, I think she probably felt like a bit of an idiot at that point, and I've been in that place of assuming something about somebody and then discovering that they have this whole other life and persona that you didn't know about, that you'd imagine them in a way that they're not.
But also that he's allowed to live that life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's different. If he'd have been a woman,
yeah,
that life would have been very different.
Absolutely.
Without giving too many spoilers away.
So he's allowed to live that life.
Yes.
And then a couple of chapters later, he tells a story about a woman in the Blackfish story who's not allowed to live that life, whose very existence is transgression.
Yeah, that's it. I just kept, honestly, Annie, I'm asking you so many questions. I just think it's fascinating. I absolutely do. I think that all the time that you have spent in Scrivener, which drives me nuts, but well done for your patience. I think just doing that and going through and pulling it apart and putting it together, I just think it's incredible, because it does work. It flows. You sit, you read a bit, and then read another bit, and all those parallels come through too, on top of everything else. I'm just awestruck by it. I just think it's absolutely I just couldn't put it down. I know people say that, and it's just, oh, it's an unputdownable book and a must read, genuinely heartfelt. I could not put it down. It really was so compelling, and yeah, it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I'm just blown away by it, and it's just such an honor to have known you from when we first spoke to you on the podcast to now. And this is just like a little story with a jelly on top. It's amazing.
Oh, thank you. I mean, thank you so much for your lovely words. But it is really lovely, because I think I was I on episode 2?
You were. We were all a bit nervous.
All those years ago.
Before we knew what the word COVID was. Yes, one of those.
Oh yeah, pre-COVID. I'm pretty sure I broke the world record for saying a lot during that podcast, and
that's Michael.
Hopefully I've said a bit less this time.
You didn't even come close to the amount of ums that I still do, so please don't you worry about that.
Yeah, it is kind of amazing to think I can't even remember where I was with the book then. Maybe part way through. But yeah, it's incredible really to kind of think back, and all that's changed in the world as well between when I first came on and now. And yeah, it's only 3 years, but it seems like more than 3 years worth of stuff has happened in the world between then and now. Definitely.
It's so good to have you back on. I was going to ask you actually, we often ask, Michael often asks this, but I'm going to nip in there if that's all right, Michael, and sort of say, I know you sort of say you immerse yourself in books, and I don't want to have to put you on the spot and say, well, what's the next one about? Because it sounds quite private. But does that mean that you are utterly immersed in that one and you're not thinking 3 years further on? Are you just in that one?
Yeah, I suppose I am just in that one. Obviously, publication of my Hollow Sea is coming up, so that's a little bit of a distraction. But yeah, I do like to just immerse myself in the one world, I guess. And I don't mind talking about it. It's actually it's a historical ghost story, feminist time slip body swap story set in late 16th century Italy and early 17th century London, and it's about the life of Vittoria Accoramboni, who was a noblewoman who was assassinated in 1585 when she was 28. She was famously childless, and she's been written about quite a lot by other people, sometimes quite well and sometimes not so well. So I guess I still have more to say about childlessness, but it's not quite so personal this time. So I have a little bit more distance this time, but certainly she's an absolutely fascinating character who's been written about mainly by men. She was the subject of John Webster's Jacobean play The White Devil, and he kind of he dealt with her in a very complex way, and there have been some other books that have dealt with her as in a very simplistic way. So I have lots to say, and she has lots to say.
Oh, I love that.
And so,
Annie Kirby, the author that rights wrongs.
Well, I don't know if I'll be writing wrong, but I'll certainly be giving her a voice that I haven't seen in other representations of her. So I'm very, very much immersed in her world at the moment.
Oh, I can't wait. I was the same as Berenice. I couldn't put that one down, and I couldn't see how it was going to end either. I was like, oh.
Thank
so
you.
I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I loved the mythology as well, because I'm really into sort of mythology and folklore. But yeah, I loved it. Really, really well worth a read.
Thank you so much. I really love mythology and folklore as well, and I had a bit of a theory about the way in which not just mythology and folklore, but stories generally, childless characters, if you're a deserving childless character, then you get a supernatural baby or a baby floats down the river. So there's kind of like various folklore where things like that happen, and if you're undeserving, then you become the witch or the child stealer character. And I think at the beginning of the novel, that was kind of my view, was about I wanted to look at childlessness in mythology, but by the time I got to the end, I was a bit more nuanced, because I could see actually mothers treated really badly in mythology. Anyone who's a child out of wedlock, anything, like anyone who does not conform to a very, very kind of narrow view. So by the time I got to the end of the book, it was a bit more nuanced, and it wasn't just about childless women in myth, but women more generally. But it's kind of fascinating to see how kind of attitudes from really old and ancient stories are kind of still there, and the pattern continues in modern storytelling and in film and in news journalism and things like that as well. It's really interesting to see, I guess, there's a symbiotic relationship between storytelling and the culture that we live in. And it was really interesting to be able to play around with that a bit in the book.
Oh, I love that. It's a fine line, isn't it, between a fairy godmother, bibbity bobbity boo, and being a witch, isn't it?
Yeah,
really?
very fine line.
Never thought I'd get bibbity bobbity in.
I was going to say, I think that's amazing. I wanted just to say one quick thing, and that is Merrin. I think when you're talking about unfairness, Merrin is appallingly badly treated too, isn't she?
She is, and although she is, I guess from the perspective of Thordis, not very well liked, with good reason, but she's also a strong woman and also a victim as well. And I imagine it would have been quite hard for her to ask for help, but she did. Women do have a tough time of it in my book. I'm so sorry about that, but
I think you do it so sensitively, because actually I think there's a possible, we do miss that, I think, in terms of as a collective, as a demographic. There's an awful lot of publishing goes on in our community that's factual, which is wonderful, but I think you're a very rare example of somebody who's written authentically about childlessness and holds a safe space for the reader within that, so that the book is also then accessible to anybody who has no knowledge of childlessness. It's more than that. It's so much more than that. There's so many more themes and things within the book. I think that's important, but also very rare. I can't think of another. There was one thing on television once a while ago, and that had a character in it, and I can't think, it had David Tennant in it and somebody else, and it was that had a character in it who was trying to conceive, and I don't think that they did, and that was on, I think, last year sometime. I don't think I've seen anything much else. I was trying to write a list of this randomly the other day, characters who have been through IVF that it didn't work, and there is, I think I came up with this character, and I have got this. I've awfully forgotten the name of the series.
I know the TV series that you're referring to. I can't remember what it was.
I can't remember either.
There's not much. So I've actually done a bit of a call out on Twitter asking, recommend me your books about childlessness where there's no miracle baby at the end, and it's a handful, I can tell you. As I mentioned Reese and Penn earlier, so that's a recently published book. Growing Season by Senny Glaister is a really lovely book about a couple who are coming to terms with being childless not by choice, and amazingly written by someone who's actually a mother, but she's done her research, and I would absolutely recommend that book. I've also been told about a book by Leslie Glaister, the name of which is escaping me at the moment. I haven't read it, but an older book. I'll have to go and look up the title, but they're really very few and far between. Interestingly, what did I read? The book by, is it Richard Powers, The Overstory? So it's a Pulitzer Prize winning book about trees. But one of the subplots is about a couple coming to terms with childlessness, and it's such a long novel that the subplot is almost as a novel in itself, because he has space to deal with it. I thought that he did a really excellent job as well. What I haven't seen is much diversity. So obviously there's Ruth and Penn out in May, and the Hollow-Sea out in August, and both Emily Pine and I are kind of white, well educated. She's a university professor, I'm a university researcher. I've not seen anything really about from writers of colour or from the LGBTQ community that's represented or told those stories of childlessness. So the tiny handful that has been done is not very diverse either. So I just really hope that publishers will start to take more of a risk with those types of stories, and not always look for the miracle pregnancy at the end. And I can understand why that's attractive to readers and to publishers, and it finishes the story off nicely and that kind of thing. But just I think there are so many more stories out there to tell, and I think I just really it's my hope that publishers will become a bit more open to those stories, because there must be people out there writing them.
I think they're probably
Sure, it's not just
Publishing's
me.
a very contentious thing
Yeah.
at the moment, isn't there? There's lots of stuff going on at the moment in publishing and disruption, I think, over arguments around representation and around language in diversity that rumbles on Twitter a lot at the moment. There's a whole thing boiled up with Pan Macmillan over the publication of a particular book that has some very, very, in my opinion, offensive language in it. A lot
I
of
know the
people
book you're referring
like,
to.
you know the one I mean.
I do.
And it's just it's caused, I think, some publishers to either, I think, perhaps review and think that maybe they need to do more on diversity, and others, I think, will just shy away and go, oh no, we're not going to get into that one because it's all a bit kind of difficult and we might get sued. And actually, I think that is just so wrong, because it puts people at a disadvantage, and it builds into that narrative that we've talked about before. Michael, I know you talked about it in relation to Game of Thrones, and about the perception of childless men and childless women, and how, you know, they are seen in mythology as that. And in fact, actually, I was watching something the other day, randomly, completely retro moment, and I was watching some of the old episodes of The X-Files, and of course, Miracle Child at the end. I remember it being, it was before I'd even thought about IVF, but of course there is an IVF narrative in that, and of course, ultimately at the end, the character has a child through some mysterious circumstances that may or may not be to do with birds and bees, we don't know. And I think, again, you're doing that. And there's only one book I've ever thrown at the wall that I couldn't read, and I'm not going to name it because the author is based in where I live. Cambridge is a small city, but again, it's the miracle of conception through witchcraft, written from in the perspective of somebody who is a parent, and I just couldn't read it. I've never, ever, apart from A Little Life, which I found too traumatic to read, and I'm trying to read it in tiny bits. This other book, I just couldn't read it. I couldn't. It was very, very rare. It annoyed me to the high heavens. I couldn't deal with it. But because again, it's this, here's the thing that people want, the child at the end, and we did it via a cauldron. That'll give you a clue, maybe. Perhaps of the title. I'm not going to say in case I get sued, but for my personal opinion, I found it quite difficult to read because it was poorly researched, and I think that's probably largely my problem. I think with a lot of these stories, and I'm sure listeners would agree, is actually sometimes they're quite badly researched. It's IVF is easy, or this is easy, or that's easy, and actually all the routes that we end up in this space are incredibly complex and incredibly painful, and that gets overlooked in the expense of reader satisfaction, and then you've got a whole demographic that isn't represented in any way, and that's really sad.
It is really sad. One of the reasons I was so impressed with Growing Season by Sunny Glaister is because Sunny is a mum, but she's obviously talked to people and done her research, and if I hadn't known she was a mother when I read the book, I would have assumed that she'd been through that experience herself. So I was really impressed with that. I think there's a problem with publishing generally, is in how they decide what books to buy and how much they decide that they will pay for the book that they're buying. It's largely based on what previous books have been successful. So it's like a self-perpetuating cycle, and that's one of the reasons that there's been historically such a lack of diversity in publishing. And I think that is changing. Maybe not quickly enough. I think it is changing. I don't know the answer. I mean, the book you referred to earlier, where had the really offensive terms in, and I think it wasn't just the offensive-ness of the terms in the book, but the way people were treated when they pointed it out.
Absolutely, I think that was the worst part. You're right. It's the fallout from it.
You can almost say, well, that writer made a mistake that she could go away and learn from, but that was not the position that was taken. It was the position was to go on, not even to go on to the defensive, but to go on to the attack. And publishing has to be better than that.
Yeah.
And one way it can be better is for publishers to take chances on stories that haven't been told before, but it's very difficult for them to do that because the way that they acquire books, they literally look at books that they've previously published and how they've sold and how they've done. So I guess a new model is needed, but I don't know enough about publishing and how it works to know what the answer is. There's no magical solution, sadly.
There isn't. One of my great dreams is to actually have a publishing list of childless, not by choice authors. I would love to do that. I'm getting a little bit too long in the tooth to do it now. And I also know too much about publishing to think that I'd like to do it unless I had a lottery win behind me. It's too risky. It is such a risky thing. And that's the sad thing about it, is actually I think it would be a brilliant thing to do. But unfortunately, I've got too many battle scars from publishing to think that I'd like to do that. But maybe somewhere out there, there's a publisher who is thinking of that, and if by some chance they happen on this particular episode of the podcast, then please tell us about it, because it is absolutely needed, I think. For it has to change, as you're right. And the weird wonderful thing and the irony of this awful debate and this inequality that's happening within this particular book and the offensiveness of the attack is that probably most of those publishing houses are going through huge amounts of inclusivity and diversity training, so the staff probably do know more than probably some of the other people that are looking at the books. And I think that's really, really, really sad actually as well. Because I think if any business operated on that particular kind of level, then I couldn't possibly be in business right now, and certainly nobody would want to work for them. Anyway, enough said about that. We'll move on gracefully. Annie, when is your book being published, and where can people buy it?
It's out on the 18th of August, and you can buy it from wherever you like to buy your books, actually. All good bookshops.
They're everywhere.
If it's not in stock, the bookshop can order it for you. But yeah, it should be everywhere. Available for pre-order, or from the 18th of August in bookshops or online.
Fantastic. I was speaking to the chap at Bert's Books, who's based in Swindon. It's a new bookshop that's just open.
I love Bert's Books.
Go support Bert's Books. He's absolutely brilliant Twitter feed as well. And I recommended, I said, what you've been reading? I was like, proof copy of The Hollow Sea by Annie Kirby. And he tweeted or direct messaged me to say, I'm going to be ordering it for customers. You can go and order it from Bert's Books as well.
Thank you for listening. We hope you found Annie's story as inspiring as we did. If you'd like to find out more about The Hollow Sea, go to penguin.co.uk and search for the book title. Remember to support indie bookshops when you place an order. Annie's website is anniekirby.com. If you'd like to find out more about the Full Stop, the CIC, or you have a topic we haven't covered, or you'd like to be a guest, then please reach out to us. We'd like to be as inclusive and diverse as possible. You can find us on linktree/fullstopcic. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and LinkedIn, and we have a channel on YouTube. All of these are listed on our Linktree, which is also featured in all of our bios on social media, and on the website, which is thefullstoppod.com. Here you can sign up for our listeners list, where you can keep up to date with what's going on in our world. And you can also donate to our work too via our Ko-fi fundraising page. And as always, it's important for us to tell you, you're not alone.
I've loved it, and thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me back. Thank you for reading the book and liking it.
Oh, I adored it. It was fantastic.
Absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
It really does mean a lot to me, for people from within our community to read the book and like it. And I know not everybody will, because it's subjective, but it was definitely an area of nervousness for me.
I can imagine.
The response.